So yes, as Emma said, my name is Beth Williams. I am one of the two law tutors at Pembroke. My areas of interest are criminal law and public law, although most of my work is focused on digital tech and law, which is quite interesting. So you can ask me any questions about that later if you want to. And certainly what I'm going to talk to you about now is, first of all, why you might think of doing a law degree and what thoughts might be going through your head and how we can help with those. And then later on in the talk, I'll talk to you about the application process and what you'll go through if you decide to do want to study law here. There we go. So why would you think about studying law? And one obvious reason why you would think about doing it is because it's the most direct route to becoming a lawyer. So a lot of you might be thinking that's what it is that you want to do for your career, and there's no question this is the most direct route to doing that. But you can become a lawyer without studying law, and you don't have to become a lawyer just because you do study law. And in fact, one of the things that is very good about a law degree is that, first of all, you don't have to become a lawyer at the end of it, but if you decide to do something else, the skills you will have got through a law degree are incredibly good skills to have just in general, or what employers refer to as transferable skills. There are a bunch of skills that will be really useful to you, whatever it is that you go on to do. And lots of my students don't go on to do law, and that's fine. They've chosen to do other things, and those skills are still really useful to them. So what are the skills that you get? What are these transferable skills that you get on a law degree? The first thing is that you will learn to read huge amounts of material very quickly and digest and analyse it really rapidly. So at the beginning of your course, when you're a first year, no doubt your masters will tell you this later, that you get to reading this. How am I going to get through all that stuff? There's loads of reading. And you would be amazed how quickly you learn to do that, because you learn not to read every single word, but to kind of go through an article or a case and go, right, what are the really important bits out of this? And then you get to be able to extract those really important bits out of the information really rapidly, and then you move on to the next source and you do the same thing. You hoover up the stuff you need to know out of it, bin the rest, and then move on to the next thing. And that ability to do that is an incredibly useful skill. It might be that you're working in a completely different area and your boss says to you, can you go through these sales reports for the last however many years? Or, if we're thinking about doing something that's not law related, not like admission, can you look at all this admissions related data and fill it out really quickly? That's a thing that you can do. So whatever the information is that you're processing in the future, that ability to extract information from it really quickly is a really, really valuable and important skill. And it's something that you learn very quickly in the first term of your law degree, and then you have it for the rest of your degree and the rest of your life. So it's an incredibly useful thing to be able to do. We also teach people to write very effectively. So again, you write essays at some incredible rates while you're here. As we say from other universities, you might have an essay a term or an essay a half term there. Here you'll have 1.5 as averages out essays per week here. And again, at the beginning, you think, gosh, how am I going to do that? And very quickly, you get to the point where you really can write an essay standing on your head for sleep with your eyes closed. You just get very, very good at doing it very quickly. And again, that's incredibly useful, because somebody in your work, whatever your work turns out to be in the future, says, look, can you just write up about this? We need somebody specific. Can you just write up a paper that summarises all of this stuff? You can do that at the drop of a hat. It's really not a big thing for you to do, because it's what you've spent 3 years training to do really effectively. And you get lots of feedback and help from your tutors. We'll talk more about the tutorials this later on. You get lots of individualised feedback on those essays, those papers that you hand in. And so you get better and better and better at doing it. And that means that when you go off, whatever it is you go to do, whether you go to be a lawyer or you do something else, you've got this ability to just write really effectively and really clearly and convey your ideas really well. And that's an incredibly useful thing to be able to do. We also teach people to think for themselves. So you don't just kind of absorb this massive information and sit there with it passively. We teach you to get the information, but then to think about it. Is that right? Is that what you would have done in that situation? Are we going the right way with the rules at the moment? Is that the right thing to do? Do you think? Could we reform it? And again, you will find that, if you don't already when you start, by the time you've been here for 5 minutes, you listen to news reports and you'll hear somebody say, we're doing this for these reasons. And you'll think, well, that doesn't make sense. If it would be for those reasons, you'd be doing this instead. And your brain will just automatically do that. You will think critically about what you're hearing, and you'll think whether it makes sense, and you'll be able to pick holes in arguments that you hear people making. You'll be able to analyse weaknesses in things that you're being told very, very quickly, almost without realising that you're able to do it. And so it will make you listen to everything. You read the news differently, listen to stuff that you come across on social media, read stuff on social media, whatever it is, you will find yourself thinking about that differently, because that's what we've taught you to do. We've taught you to take the information and think critically about it and think, well, what do I think about this? Does this make sense to me? Are we doing the right things here? Would I change things? Would I have a different set of rules from the ones that we've got? And again, that's a very useful skill, because you go into your place of work, whatever it might be, and you look around at the way things are done and you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why do we do things this way around? If we switch it around, we'd be much more efficient. And suddenly you're the person in that context who has the really interesting ideas for, how you might develop a business, or how you might change a system, or, how you might do things differently. And again, that's an incredibly valuable thing that employers will want, even if they're not legal employers. So even if you don't go into the law, that ability to think critically about what information you're getting, write about it, do something intelligent with this, and put your own stamp on it. That's an incredibly useful set of skills, and that's really what it is that you're learning on a law degree. At least as much as you learn what the law is, you learn those really, really useful skills that you will then take with you right the way through life. Part of that thinking about it critically is that we will teach you to make really fine logical distinctions. So we'll teach you to sort of look at what look like two very similar scenarios, but if there's a very subtle difference between them, we'll explore that difference with you and help you to think about, well, does that difference change things? It looks like only a small difference on the surface, but actually, does that have a bigger impact in terms of the way that we should treat those two scenarios, or the rules that should apply to those two scenarios? So again, it will make you very good at thinking in a very detailed and subtle way about things. So it's not just broad brush distinctions that you'll learn to pick up on. You'll learn to pick up on those really fine detailed distinctions as well. And again, having that kind of really sharp eye and really sharp critical ability is something that's incredibly useful to you, whatever it is that you go on to do, because again, whatever information you're dealing with in the future, the ability to go, well, actually, those two situations are not really quite the same, are they? There is a distinction between them. And we then need to explore that distinction and think about what we do with it going forwards. That's a very valuable skill, and somebody else might miss that, but you will be really well trained to pick up on that. And so that's a really useful thing for you to have as well. We also teach you to think about the rules. So we don't just teach you what the rules are, we teach you to think about them. How does a particular set of rules make people operate in a particular way? And sometimes that can be quite counterintuitive. So there's a famous study which economists know all about, which is about a nursery in Israel. And this nursery had a problem because parents were constantly turning up late to collect their children. It was supposed to shut at 5:30, whatever it was. Parents were constantly turning up at 5:45, going, oh, really sorry, I'm really going on, that's really sorry. But it kept happening. So the nursery started charging parents for being late to pick up their kids. But what do you think would happen? Who thinks that would make parents pick up their kids more on time? Yeah? Who thinks it would have the opposite effect? You're right. That was exactly the effect that it had. Because the parents, instead of going, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late, I'm really terrible, I'll try harder next time, and sort of feeling incentivised to try and do better, the parents are going, pay for it now. So not later I want to. It's just a charge, isn't it? I'm just paying for service, basically. And so it completely changed the relationship that the nursery had with the parents. And in fact, they then realised that and said, oh, okay, we'll stop doing that. And they couldn't go back again. Even when they stopped charging, the damage was done, and the parents' relationship with the nursery and how they felt about being late picking up their kids was the same and didn't change back again. So it's a really interesting example of how you change rules because you think they're going to make people do one thing, and in fact you change rules and they make people do the complete opposite. And that also is something that we'll think about a lot in the course. We'll teach you what the rules are, but then we'll say, what does that incentivise? How are people going to respond to those rules? What would you do if that was the rule? Would you, be more abiding by it, or would that actually make you think, well, I'm not going to do what the rule wants me to do? And so we think about how rules get people to do certain things, and if we want people to do certain things, are these rules the right way of going about that? Are rules at all the right way of going about doing that? And that's very much something that we think about as well. So we think about the underlying policy and the economics and the philosophy and the theory behind the rules about whether they are really the right rules that we want in a particular circumstance. And then you can bring that into your process of thinking critically about those rules. You'll have all of those extra tools to analyse the rules in those terms, and that will help you with that process of going, actually, I've analysed these rules and I don't think we're doing quite the right thing and I think we should reform them. And again, that's an incredibly useful set of skills to have, because you might not be thinking about incentivising people through law, you might be thinking about incentivising people to buy your products, or to do something else in a different field that you go on to work in. But that's still an incredibly useful set of skills to have. So whether you want to be a lawyer or not, pretty hard to beat the skills that you will get on the law degree. So it's a really useful degree, whatever you want to do. And there's certainly no compulsion to do law at the end of it, though obviously it's a brilliant route to doing that if that's what you want to do. So why would you want to come here and study it? Well, I think if you don't take anything else away from this morning, that top line is pretty much it. Everything here is the absolute best that it can be. So the tutors are, world experts in the fields that they will be tutoring you about. They will be writing, cutting edge, world leading research on the stuff that they then come to your tutorials and talk to you about. All the people that you're here with will be people who hopefully are, have things in common with you, which is that they want to be the best at what they're doing. So they want to be the best lawyer that they can be while they're doing 3 years of a law degree. And so they will be pushing themselves to be as excellent as they possibly can be. Unsurprisingly, given that combination, it means then that the people who do exams here go on to get excellent results. And that again is why employers are so keen on our graduates, is because they know that they will have had a fantastic education, they will be surrounded by people who are pushing themselves to be as good as they could be, to use their brains as much as they possibly could. They will know that they've had that input from the tutors at a very individual level, but on really world-class research. And as I say, the results that come out of that are really excellent. So that then makes you a very valuable asset to a potential employer. And so they will be constantly, you'll be surrounded by employers during your whole degree trying to persuade you that you want to go and work for them. About 75% of our graduates do go on to join the legal profession. So most people who come here do it because they want to go on to practice law afterwards. But that's a significant 25% who don't. And I think about the course of my time, I've had students who have gone on to do all sorts of things. I've had them go on to be teachers, I've had them go on to be vicars, I've had them go on to work for magazines, all sorts of different things that they've gone on to do, or work for the civil service that were not law. So there's really no limits to what you can do with a law degree at the end of it. It's a very, very good basic degree to have, and if you want to become a lawyer, then obviously it's perfectly set up for that. While you're here, as I say, you will have access to some of the world's leading scholars. You can go to any university and you can read the textbook, you can come here and be taught by the person who wrote the textbook in lots of instances. And that's incredibly valuable. They will be working on the next edition, obviously, as they teach you, they will be thinking about this stuff in real time, and they will share it with you in the teaching that they do, whether it's lectures like this or more individual sessions that they have with you. So you really do have access to incredible resources in that sense. We are also probably the only leading law school in the world where the main means by which teaching is done is through what we call tutorials, which is group discussion in groups as small as 1, 2, or 3 students and a tutor. So the normal option is 2 of you and 1 tutor for an hour, 8 times, usually once a week for 8 weeks. So that's an incredible level of input from that tutor and an amazing level of access that you have to that tutor, just you and one other person in the room with them. And as I say, we're pretty rare in only having those paired tutorials. They aren't any bigger usually. If you have any particular disabilities or any special needs, you may well be tutored on your own with the tutor. If you're in an odd number of year groups, if there's 9 of you, yes, there will have to be one group of 3 just to make the numbers work, but that probably won't happen very often during the course of your 3 years. So by and large, most of your tutorials will be done with just 2 of you and 1 tutor, and they will go through that written work that you produce for that tutorial. They'll give you detailed feedback on it, they will answer any questions that you have about the topic, they will discuss their work with you, and so that's incredible access that you have to that person for an hour a week, every week through the course of an 8-week term typically. And the other thing that we have here, which is an amazing kind of jewel in the law faculty really, is the Body and Law Library. It has more than 40,000 law-related items. It's a copyright library, which means if you publish something on anything to do with law in the UK, you have to deposit a copy by law, you have to deposit a copy in the Body and Law Library. That's more than almost any other comparable library in the UK. But of course, we're not just talking about physical books being deposited anymore. That, especially after the course of the last 2 years, has incredible online resources as well. Lots of books are available electronically. Certainly all the kind of legal databases of cases and legislation that you would be accessing, you have access to all of that electronically. That means when you go home over the vacations, you've got the same access as you would have if you were still at Oxford. So you've effectively got the virtual version of the Body and Law Library still still online for you all through that time. The other thing that's amazing about the Bodleian Law Library is the people who work there. They are fantastic. They are really, really good at what they do. If you need to be able to access something, however obscure and random it might be, and I know this from experience, they kind of make it a point of professional pride that they will find it for you and they will make it work for you. And they're really, really good at doing that. And they're also really nice. So you can just send them a random email going, I'm not really sure what to do about this, can you help me? And they will absolutely help you with it. And that's what they really love to do. So it's an incredible, valuable resource to have. And they're very, very student-centric, and they want to make the resources that they have work for you really well over the course of your degree. And so that's fantastically useful and fantastically helpful as a resource. So what might you have heard about? Obviously, this all sounds great, might sound this, but you know, I've got this stuff in the back of my head that other people have told me, or that I've picked up maybe from the press or wherever it might be, that's worrying me a little bit about. So I'm thinking, well, maybe it's not for me, despite all that great stuff, because of some of these other things. So one of the things people sometimes worry about is that Oxford is maybe going to be more expensive than other universities. Well, that is just not true in terms of fees. All universities pretty much elect to charge the same fee at the same time, and so ours are absolutely in line with all other universities. One of the differences between us and other universities is that we knew from the start, when fees existed, that this was going to pose a problem for some people, and that it was going to deter exactly some of the sorts of people that we wanted to come here. And so a lot of people, a lot of our alumni donated money specifically to ensure that money is never going to be a barrier to somebody coming to Oxford. So nobody should ever be able to say, I would have gone to Oxford, but I couldn't afford it. And one of the ways that we do that is we have this very extensive bursaries and funding and support financially for students. So I've put the web link on there, and I'm sure it's available on the faculty's website as well. If you go to that link, it has all sorts of information about the bursaries and financial support to which you might be entitled. And that's just the university level stuff. When you go to your colleges, they also have pots of money for exactly the same purpose. And I can genuinely tell you that in my own college, we have some pots of money which are not exhausted, so there's still money left in them. We've given all the money to all people who need it, and there is still money left in some of those pots. And my college is by no means one of the richest colleges. There are much, much richer colleges in Pembroke. So that's just a sort of indication of the amount of support that there is out there. And it really is the case that nobody should ever be deterred from coming here for financial reasons. So if you think that might be you, and if you're worried about how that might work, and you think, well, I'd love to come, but I just don't see financially how it would work, please do get in touch with us and let us talk you through that, because there is a way to make it work, and we can absolutely help you to do that. So that's definitely a complete myth, and really not something that you need to worry about. Another thing that you would absolutely believe if you listen to the press and you listen to the way that Oxford is represented is that you would believe that people from state schools are in the minority here, whereas of course they're in the majority in the population at large, and that is also not true. So on the most recent set of statistics which are published, and again I've put the link to that at the bottom, looking at the statistics from 2016 through to 2020, and the report was published last year, so it's always a little bit of a time lag. The proportion of state school students in the university was 68.6%. 11.2% independent, 20.2% from outside the UK, because that's another key thing about our student cohort, because we have lots of international students. So you will be being taught and you will be learning alongside people from literally all over the world. And that's a really fun aspect of being part of our student body as well. But yes, as you can see from that, 68.6% of our student intake is in fact from state schools. And that's across the university as a whole. If you look at law specifically, law is always the subject that has the most of whatever metric it is that you might be looking at on this front. And in our case, in 2020, our intake was 75.4% state school. So any of the press reports that you might have read that suggest that actually the whole of Oxford is dominated by the independent sector, that's just not true in terms of the actual statistics of who we take. And as I say, if you want to look more at what the admission statistics are over the course of that period, I've put the link there. It's all published. You only actually need to Google Oxford admission statistics and you'll probably get to that report immediately. So yes, you can have a look at that if you want to know more about who comes to Oxford from where and in what contexts. Another thing people worry about is that it will maybe put other universities off if you apply here. So they think, oh gosh, I'm going to go down as being an Oxford type person, and maybe that'll put Bristol or Manchester or wherever else I'm applying off. And that's not the case either. No university can tell from the class form what other universities you apply to universities just get their own version of your UCAS form. They don't get any of the other information that pertains to any of the other universities that's on there, so they can't see any of that. And you don't have to say anything about Oxford in your personal statement either. You can write a very generic personal statement that's just about wanting to do law or whatever it might be anyway, and that's absolutely fine. So we don't expect you to mention anything about it here. So there's actually no way another university could tell. The only thing they're going to know is that you're obviously a really good and a really bright candidate, and that's going to make them want you. So there's certainly no way that we're going to put people off if you apply to us. Another thing that you might have heard, and certainly this was true in the past, is that already it matters which college you apply to, and maybe your chances of getting in are going to be affected by the college to which you apply. And we've worked really hard, especially over the last couple of years, to reform the way that we do the admissions process, particularly in law, but across the university, to minimise the impact of your college choice on your chances of getting in. So as much as possible, we try to make it the case that your chances of getting in are not affected by your college choice, and that we really have done an awful lot in law particularly, so that should really not be an issue anymore. Reasons for that: well, firstly, you can make an open application, so you don't have to apply to a college at all. If you just think, well, I'd like to go to Oxford and I'm not really that fussed about where I go, that's absolutely fine. Make an open application, and again, the college won't know. You will be automatically allocated to the college, and they won't know that you made an open application. They won't say, oh, you didn't choose us first. None of that will happen. They wouldn't care anyway, but they won't know. You'll just be an open application that looks like an application to St John's, wherever it was. That's absolutely fine. So you don't have to choose a college. If you do choose a college and you'd like to go there, by all means write that down. But if you don't, then there's no compulsion to do that. And the thing that really makes a difference, and the thing we've changed over the course of the last 2 years, is that we now move candidates a lot between colleges. So you might well apply to a college, think you do like that college and apply to it. You might discover that you're actually invited to interview to a different college. You may then find that during your science interview, you're interviewed both by that other college and by a third college again. And then you can even be made an offer by a fourth college who hasn't seen you at interview. So we move candidates a lot around the colleges during the admissions process. It's very much a process which now the faculty has oversight of. So we don't have pockets of law students or law candidates in different colleges doing different things. It's one big system. Colleges tell us how many places they have to fill, and we as a faculty try to make sure that they get to see enough of the good candidates to make sure that the top level of candidates gets in across Oxford somewhere, and we make that happen. And we're not in a situation where a college has still got places and there's other candidates floating about and they aren't meeting each other. We now make sure that if a college has places available, the best candidates still available are seen by that college and can have those places. So we hope now that across the whole of Oxford, the top level of candidates will get in somewhere. But as I say, there will be a lot of shuffling about between colleges during that process. So even if you do apply to a college, I would say don't get desperately attached to that college, because you may very well find that although you apply to it, as I say, you'll see in 2 or 3 other places and given an offer somewhere ultimately. You may even at the end of the process be given a thing called an open offer, which just says, yes, you've got a place in Oxford, and we'll let you know in the summer exactly which college that's going to be. And that again is just because we're trying to make our numbers balance. We're trying to make sure that people find a place in Oxford somewhere. It's certainly whichever of these things happen to you is no reflection at all on your ability. Everybody who gets an offer somewhere has absolutely the same ability as everybody else, and we're very pleased to have you. It's just about the logistics of trying to make sure that we have the right number of people in the right places. And over the, if we're thinking about some 224 people, 240 sort of people, that kind of number, that's a lot of people to handle. And so, it does take a little bit of jiggling around to make sure that we've got people in the right places. So as I say, you may find that you get passed between colleges, or you get made an open offer and say none of this is a reflection on you. It's just about us saying this is the person we want in Oxford, and we just have to figure out where the numbers work and where we're going to find that person at home. So that's what that's about. And so you will find that more than half of the candidates that we see are seen by more than one college. So considerably more than half this last year were seen by more than one college during the interview process. So to say, if you do apply to a college, that's lovely, but don't get too attached to it, because you may very well find that you get moved around between the colleges, because really most people do now. The thing to say about that is that you will not find anybody who within 5 minutes of arriving doesn't think their own college is actually the best college in the entire universe. So it doesn't take very long for you to completely fall in love with whichever college you do end up at, and then you can't imagine that you could ever be anywhere else. It was just obvious that you're supposed to be there because that is the best college, and I don't know anybody who doesn't feel like that. So wherever you end up, you will be very happy. And a lot of it is very centralised anyway, so the college is really much more about where you live, and your study is very much centrally organised as well. So other things that you might be thinking about Oxford as well, I don't know if our office is in there, it's all very formal, it's very traditional, don't know if that's really for me. Well, you're right, some things are really formal and traditional. So you can see my office in the bottom left-hand corner. I have an office in a lovely old building in Pembroke. You will spend time in the Sheldonian Theatre when you get your degree, when you matriculate at the beginning of your course, and you will be dressed up like those people in that photograph at the bottom, in the middle, and at the top. And you'll have all that kind of paraphernalia on. What I generally find, again, is that actually when people are here, they kind of like all of that, really. We don't do it all the time. It's generally only for special occasions. And actually, it's a sign that you belong to an institution that has been going for hundreds and hundreds of years, and you earned your place there. And people are actually really proud of that, because if you are here, that is a sign that you are a really smart person, that we think a lot of your kind of work ethic and your abilities, and you are part of an amazing institution. And most people actually kind of quite like that. Every so often we canvass the students, because students do wear some of this academic stuff to do their exams in, and every so often we poll the students and say, do you still want to do that, and would you rather just turn up in suits and t-shirt? And there is always an overwhelming majority of people who say, no, we want to keep the traditional academic dress. And so we do poll people regularly to check, and they do always say, no, we do really like it, because it gives them that sense of occasion. They think, well, actually, I've earned this, this is mine now, and I belong here, and this is part of me. And so people actually, when things are formal, kind of like that, because they're entitled to it. You've earned your place here. And of course, not everything is really like that. Most of your day-to-day stuff is not like that at all. That is, as I say, much more the kind of occasional things. So there's a couple of pictures on there that top left and bottom right are both St Catherine's College, just around the corner. The one that's sort of lit up a bit at night is Pembroke, that's my college. You will find most colleges have a new build quad of some kind. So yes, they'll have their own traditional buildings, but they will also have a new bit of college that they've built in the last 100 years, which is much more up to date and has things like ensuite bathrooms and whatever. So if what you want is to live in a more modern facility, that is usually possible, and most colleges have a combination of two. In fact, living in the old sorts of buildings, that's possible, but they usually have some really modern facilities as well. In terms of the sports facilities, that's a picture of the university pool. There's amazing kind of 21st century sports facilities, and the Bodleian Law Library. There's a picture there as well. I was mentioning that before. There's, that is as cutting edge as you could want a library to be. Yes, it's physical and it has those books, but as I was saying before, also has amazing online resources and amazing people to staff it. So if you want something that appears to the 21st century, then it is. That goes to the excellence point that I was making before. Anything that you need to be up to date and really very functional in the 21st century, you will generally find that it is. So what is it? Those are all the things that are not true about Oxford. So things that might have been bothering you that actually you don't need to worry about quite so much anymore. What are the truths about Oxford? What are the things you do want you to take away? Well, really, Oxford is what you make of it. And that's true on any front. The more you put into your academic work, the better the results that you get out, the more you will find your tutors put into your academic work as well, and we will absolutely help you to get the best results that you're capable of. But that's also true on other fronts as well. If you have a sport or a new music or a hobby, whatever it might be that you really like doing, I can guarantee you there are other people in Oxford who like doing that thing as well, and you can get together with them, and there will be a chance for you to do that thing, and also make the most of your life on whatever other fronts there are that you want to spend your time doing as well. So whatever you put into your experience here, you will absolutely get that out of it. As I was saying before, law students have all kinds of nationalities and backgrounds. So you will find with your group of 6 or 8 of you or whatever it is in your college, you will not all be from the same part, even of the UK, certainly not all from the same part of the world. You will have very different experiences in terms of your lives growing up in those different places. You'll come from very different family contexts and so on. So I really like Freshers in it right at the beginning of the course with our new first years, because you get to sit down with them for the first time and just chat to them and find out all about their backgrounds and their time until they came to Oxford. And they're always a kind of fantastically diverse and interesting group of people who have all sorts of interesting experiences and things to tell you about. So I really like kind of getting to know those people, because they are such a variety of people, and that happens every year. So the overall student cohort is really mixed and diverse and very welcoming from that point of view. There is no such thing, if you have a kind of picture in your head of a typical Oxford student, I can tell you there really isn't such a thing. Except that that all Oxford students really will have two things in common. They are people who have really high academic potential. That's the SAR admissions process, which I'll talk more about in a minute. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the people with the most academic potential, who can go the furthest if we invest all these resources in them. That's what we're looking for. And people who will genuinely really like learning. And I don't know about you, but I mean, for me at my school, that was quite an unusual thing to do, and not really something that you should probably let on to all the other people in your school that you did really think. But if you are secretly that person who actually genuinely finds learning quite exciting sometimes, you might not confess that to everybody, but truthfully what gets you out of bed in the morning sometimes is thinking, I could learn more about that thing, that's really interesting, then this is definitely the place for you, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for people who genuinely really love learning. If you're somebody who actually secretly might not let on to people because of what they would say about it, but if you actually think, there are some lessons that I really love and I really find those really interesting and I really look forward to them in my timetable, and Law is like those lessons that I really love, then you would be in absolutely the right place if you take it, because that's something, again, that you will find is in common between you and the rest of the student body, and certainly those people teaching you. As an academic, you really do the subject for the love of it, and you will find yourself surrounded by those people. So if you fit those two criteria, you are good at learning and you have lots of academic potential and you really love learning, this is definitely the place for you. And those are literally the only two criteria that everybody here has in common. After that, they have all sorts of different criteria and they're all sorts of different people, but they all have those two things at the heart of them that they really share, and they share that with the rest of us as well. So how does your course work if you come here? What actually happens if you come and study law here? We divide the course into two chunks. So the first chunk takes place over the course of the first two terms, so your autumn term of your first year and your spring term, called Michaelmas and Hillary, of your first year. So it runs from when you arrive in October through to Easter. So the students will be doing their exams this week in those subjects. And there are three subjects that they do. They do criminal law, constitutional law, and Roman introduction to private law. And everybody across the university studies those three subjects during the course of their first two terms, and then, as I say, is examined in this week, basically. Criminal law and constitutional law are quite straightforward. You might have been Roman law 2 minutes ago. She was on about how it's a 21st century institution, and now she's telling us that we do Roman law. That's a bit weird. It is, but we have two really good reasons why we think Roman law is a really useful thing to do at the beginning of your course, notwithstanding the fact that we are otherwise a very 21st century institution. Firstly, the civilian Roman system is the system on which continental legal systems are based. So systems like France and Germany and Spain have their legal systems based on Roman law, even Scotland actually. So if you are likely at any point in your life to want to practice in those areas or even understand the law from those areas, maybe your client trades in Spain or Germany or wherever it might be, and you need to understand a bit of German or Spanish law, it is really helpful to know the basis on which that law is built. And it's quite a different system from the common law system that you spend the rest of your degree doing. So just having a little taster of it at the beginning of your first year means that it's in there, and then if at any point in the future you come across a civilian, as we call them, legal system, a codified legal system, you've got some instincts from that very first set of stuff that you studied at university that you can build on. Yet it's not completely unfamiliar to you. You've got some inkling of how it works, and you can build on that if you need to in future. So just sort of plant that seed that this is how a civilian system works. Most of the rest of your time you're spending common law, but at least you have a bit of an idea of how the other way of doing things might work. The other thing that's really good about doing Roman law is that it really shows you what law does. So what law does is respond to problems in society to stop people fighting about them, basically. If you have a dispute between people, we need a set of rules to regulate that dispute so that they don't then fall out with each other. And Roman law shows you that happening. It's very simple issues. It's things like, what happens if my sheep get mixed with your sheep? And, what's the sort of property that we should value most highly? And then how should we have rules for transferring that property between people that make sure, we respect those property rights and make sure that, we don't transfer it accidentally between people. And those are the sorts of things that law does. And so you sort of have a kind of mini case study, if you like, in Roman law of how law does things, how law responds to problems that might arise in society, how it goes about solving those. the way it goes about solving them might be quite different from the way that we solve them in law now, and that might be quite interesting, that you can just sort of draw those comparisons. Why did they do that at the time they were operating, whereas we in the 21st century do something quite different? So it's quite a good case study in what law is and what law does. And it's very simple and very contained. It all happened a long time ago, so there's nothing kind of new or to be updated in it. But it just gives you that sort of introduction into a case study of, this is how a legal system can operate, this is how rules can be generated to solve some of those problems that arise in society. So it's actually quite a useful, for those two reasons, it's actually quite a useful thing to do right at the beginning of your law degree, even if otherwise it sounds like quite a weird thing to get people to do. Those are the reasons that we still think it's valuable and we hold on to it. After you finish your model exams at Easter, so you're around now, my first years will then come back after the Easter break, and they will start moving their way through the other side of the diagram, so collecting subjects that they will ultimately sit in finals at the end of the course. And that then takes place over the course of the rest of those 7 terms that you spend in Oxford. Summer term, we will finish the term of your first year, and then the 3 terms in each of your second and third year. So 7 terms in total. And over the course of those 7 terms, you will study the following subjects. You'll study contract, tort, land, jurisprudence, which is the philosophy of law, administrative law, trusts law, and EU law. And then on top of that, in your final year, you will get to study 2 optional subjects. And the options are from an incredible range of subjects. You can do family law, you can do intellectual property law, you can do commercial law, you can do competition law, you can do some more Roman law if you want to. You can do some more legal theory if you want to do more philosophical subjects. You can do advanced criminal law. Really, there's a huge range of subjects that you can choose from in your final year for your 2 options. Now, what you might notice if you see that is that there's a lot of compulsory subjects in that list, and there's only the 2 options in your final year, and that will contrast with what you see being available in other universities. The reason for that, and the reason why we do things like compulsory jurisprudence and compulsory Roman law, is because the idea behind the Oxford Law degree is that it is as holistic a kind of tour of law as you could possibly get, really. So the idea is that over the course of your time at Oxford, we will give you a grounding in as much as we think you could possibly ever need. So you might need to know about a civilian system like France or Germany. We'll do some Roman law with you to make sure that that's a possibility. You might need to understand why the law does what it does and criticise it and analyse it a bit more. Or we'll do compulsory jurisprudence, which is legal philosophy, with you to teach you some of the ideas behind that, some of the theories that might be underpinning the law, so that you can then use that to analyse your other different subjects that you learn. So really, as I say, it's supposed to be a kind of holistic overview of as much of law as we can teach you over the course of that time, so that you can see the links between different areas of law, and so that you have the widest possible grounding in law. If you then do want to go off to practice, there's a chance whatever you come across in future, you will have done a bit of that on your degree that you can then build on. So it is a particular way of going about doing things. It's not how every university does it, but that's why we do what we do here, is to try to do that very holistic, broadest possible view of the subject, so that you really have a kind of bird's eye view of the whole thing by the time you're done here. For that reason, we also leave the exams until the end of those 7 terms. So you start the subjects in the summer term of your first year, but you don't have any more formal exams until the end of your final year in the summer of your third year in Oxford. And again, that's because when we come to examine you at the end, we want you to have that bird's eye view. We want you to be on top of all of those different subjects at once, so that you can see the links between them, and so that you have that kind of bird's eye view of all of them. We don't want a situation where you learn something in the second year and then you drop it and then you forget about it. And then, if something links to it later on, you don't notice that because you've forgotten it and dropped it because you were done with it in the second year. So it's very much about avoiding that and trying to give you that holistic view by the time that you finish finals at the end of your final year. What that also means is no exams in the summer of your first year, no formal exams in the summer of your second year either. It does mean that you have a lot of formal exams in the summer of your final year. You will have internal exams in your college to check, like mock exams, to check that you're going on okay as you go through the course. It's not like you don't get any feedback or any practice until that point. You'll have those all the time. Whenever you come back after a vacation, you'll have a mock exam on the work you did in the previous term, so that you can sort of keep an eye on your progress as you go through. But you won't have those formal exams other than at Easter of your first year and in the summer of your final year. So if that's something that you think would suit your way of working, then this would be a good place for you to come. How do we do all that teaching? Well, there's 3 different kind of teaching formats that you might come across. Most obviously is lectures, so this is the lecture piece that we use for all of those core subjects that everybody studies, so jurisprudence or administrative law or criminal law. This is the lecture piece that you come to with all the rest of the people studying law in your year from across the university. So not just people from your college, but people from every college would come and sit in those lecture periods together, also 220, 240 of them. And obviously if it's an optional subject that only 10 people are taking in the final year, then that's different. But for most of the core subjects, that will be a full cohort of the whole year. The thing that's interesting about Oxford's lectures is that they are optional. They are not the main method of course delivery, and that's very different from other universities, even Cambridge. They play a much more significant role than they do here. Lectures here are really kind of the icing and the decoration on the top of the cake. They are not the cake. They're a kind of interesting summary of the area, or an addition to the area, or maybe a way of revising that area of law. They're not the main kind of bread and butter or core of the course delivery in that particular subject. That main core delivery is done through the tutorial system. So tutorials, as I said to you before, typically have 2 students and then occasionally 1, occasionally 3, and they are compulsory and they're arranged at college level. So your college will arrange who your tutor for criminal law, say, will be, and they're usually done by way of swaps. So, for example, because I'm a criminal law expert, I teach criminal law to Pembroke students, but I also teach St Albans students, in exchange for which my friend Imogen at St Albans teaches tort law to my students. So you will find that your teaching in individual subjects is arranged on that kind of basis, that you and the rest of the people in your year at your college will either be taught in-house or go to another college for tutorials in that particular subject. And as I say, they are compulsory. They are usually 1 every week for 8 weeks through a term. Sometimes you'll be studying one subject fully in a term, so every week, and another subject half in the term. So weeks 1, 3, 5, and 7, you'll have 2 tutorials, one, and the other weeks you won't. So it sort of varies. It averages out at 3 every 2 weeks. So over the course of your time in Oxford, you can think about it as 1.5 tutorials a week, or 3 every 2 weeks is how it averages out. As I say, sometimes, for example, you might do 2 subjects a term, and that would be a really heavy term, and then the next term you'll just do 1 subject every week. Other terms you might do 1 subject every week and 1 subject every other week through this term, and then every other week through next term. Either way, every subject you have 8 tutorials in it, spread out over 1 or 2 terms. And then, as I say, that will be you and 1 other person and the tutor in the room together, looking at your written work and answering any questions that you might have about that topic. Before the tutorial, you'll be given a reading list. So you'll be given a list of stuff that you have to study for that tutorial, and you'll be given a piece of written work to do, which might be a problem question. What do you think the law is that should apply to these facts? Or it might be an essay question. Do you think the law in this case was correctly decided? Would you have done the same thing as the court did in this case? Something like that. And you will write that piece of written work usually before or in time for the tutorial, and then either hand it in before or at the tutorial, and the tutor will go through that written work with you and talk to you about what you should have written and what you did write and whether it was the right thing to write and so on. And so you will find that you get incredibly high levels of feedback on your own work. And if there is something you don't understand, I really don't understand why this case is on reading list for this week, or can we just talk about what this judge said in this case and you don't really get it, that's fine. You've got that opportunity to do that because it's only you and 1 other person on the tutor. So that is our main method of course delivery, and that's how you will study all of those subjects that we had on that previous slide. As I say, you will have at least 1 tutorial a week, sometimes 2, sometimes 2 this week, 1 next week. You may also find that your tutors organise classes. I do this for my students that I'm doing tutorials with. So let's say I'm doing crime in a term with students from Merton and St Anne's and Pembroke. I'll do a class at the beginning of the week for that. That's about sort of 6 students from each college, so 6 to 8 students from each college. So under 20 people. We'll have a class at the beginning of the week where we go through the basics of that subject. So we do the reading, they learn the basics, we go through the basics in that class. Then everybody goes away and writes their essays for the tutorial, and that should mean that they're not going to make silly mistakes in their essays, because we've at least had a chance to touch base on the basics before they go off to write those pieces of work. What that then means is that I'm freed up a bit of the tutorials. I don't have to worry about making sure everybody's got everything, because I did that in the class at the beginning of the week. I can then spend my tutorials much more focused on what does this individual need, talking about their essays in more detail, answering any questions they might have in more detail, because I don't have to cover anything then and the tutorials have already done the bulk of the work in the class, and we can then focus the tutorial on whatever it is that those particular students need. So I quite like doing it that way because it gives me that flexibility. Not all tutors will do it in all subjects. Some will, some won't. It's entirely a preference thing. Where classes happen, they're also compulsory, but as I say, not every tutor does them. And so you will find that varies from tutor to tutor. Some tutors will do them for particularly difficult topics in some weeks, but not all topics. Other tutors will do them every week. Some tutors won't do them at all. So that will vary. So the main method of course delivery is the tutorials. You may have classes as well, and you can also go to lectures, because to say the lectures are very much the kind of the icing on the cake. They're not the key thing. We do 2 courses here. We do ordinary law, where you just stay up for all 3 of your years and then you graduate. We do another course which we call course 2, or law and law studies in Europe, where you spend your 3rd year abroad. So you still have those 3 years in Oxford that I showed you on the slide, but they are years 1, 2 and 4. And in year 3, you go abroad to one of the countries that's listed on the slide, so France, Germany, Italy, Spain, or the Netherlands. The odd one out of those is the Netherlands, because if you go to the Netherlands, you don't need another language to speak. The course is taught in English, and it's very much an EU law-focused course in general. Whereas if you go to any of the other universities, you will need a language. You'll need a language to get on the course in the first place. And then during the course, you will have classes both in that language and in the law of that country. And then you will go to that country and study the law of that country in that language. So for all the others that are not the Netherlands, you will need the relevant language to be able to go on those courses. But for the Netherlands, obviously you don't, because that's all sorts of English, so no language necessary for that. Really important to get the code right. If you're applying for one of these, they all have their own codes. These are on the practice website. But if you think you might be interested in one of them, make a note of it, and just make sure that you apply for that code. It is possible to apply for more than one of them. What you would have to do is put your favourite one down, so put your first choice down as the code, and then if you get an interview at a college, if you're invited for an interview, get in touch with that college and say, look, I'm down for law and French, or could I please also be considered for law and German law? And that college will be able to arrange for that to happen, or should be able to arrange for that to happen. You will do a language test in the areas that you're interested in, so that college will need to know that they need to organise you a language test in French, but also a language test in German if that's something that you want to do. So put your first choice down as your code, so if you're invited for interview, then get in touch with the college and say, could I also be considered for whatever is your second or third choice as well. Key things to think about: if you apply for the Law with Oral Studies in Europe course, this is a kind of an add-on, so it does not affect your chances of getting into do law at all. The way it works is that we just take people for law as kind of stage 1 of the process. If you also want to do a year abroad, that's a separate process on top. So it doesn't affect your chances of getting in on the ordinary process. The college will decide, I've got 6 places, or I've got 8 places, or whatever it might be, who are the 6 or 8 people that I want to take to do law, and that's all the college is interested in. However, if 2 of those 6 people have said they want to do law with a year abroad, the faculty will then consider those 2 people for the year abroad course, and they will tell the college those 2 people are coming to you, but they're also coming to us to do the language, or they'll say, we haven't accepted them for course 2, you're just having them for plain law. So it does not affect your chances of getting in which of the 2 courses you apply for. You'll be considered to apply as if you were applying for course 1, you'll get a place on that or not, and then the faculty will decide whether to add the language and the year abroad on top of that or not. So say that certainly doesn't affect the initial stage of are you coming to spend 3 years doing law in Oxford at some point. So yes, you mustn't don't worry about it from that point of view. It doesn't affect your chances at all from that point of view. We as colleges don't generally mind whether we're taking 6 people all to go abroad in their 3rd year or nobody to go abroad in their 3rd year. It's out of our hands, and most colleges don't mind which of those 2 things are going to happen. So you have equal chances of getting into do that. There is obviously a lower chance that you will get in to do the language version, that there's a sort of lower chance that you'll get in to do that, but there's no difference in the chance that you're getting in generally to. So if you had a 20%, let's say, chance of getting in to do law at some point, you might have a slightly less than that chance of getting into a particular course that you want to do on top of that. You will be asked at interview, and again, there's no reflection on you when it happens, but for that very reason, your college will say to you at interview, or any college that interviews you will say, are you happy to be considered for course 1 as well as course 2? Most people usually say yes to that, but that's why they're checking. is because they need to know that they can just go ahead and make you an offer for law or whatever, because you'd be happy to take that. And then, whether you get the language added to it or not is the faculty's decision after that. So you will be asked that question in interview. It's not a sign of anything. It's not a sign that you won't be offered course 2. We literally ask that of everybody who applies to both courses, because we want to know that they'd be happy to just get an offer for plain law if that's how things work out in the end. So what are we looking for when all of this happens? What are we looking for in the application process? Well, I was mentioning to you before that one of the things that you need is the ability to go through information and analyse it really quickly. So we are going to look for reasoning ability. Can you think quickly about things? Are you sensitive to language so you will be able to teach you to pick up those subtle distinctions that I was talking about before? Have you got basically good analytical skills? We will develop all of these, obviously, and that was what I was saying to you before. But if we can see that you have potential and you have promise in those areas, we know that we are going to be able to teach you those things and it's going to work out really well. So that's one of the key things that we're going to be looking for, is this ability to think quickly, to think really subtly, to pick up on really detailed things, and to be quite analytical about stuff and think critically about it. We'll also want to see your communication skills. Can you explain to us that thought process? Can you show us that thought process, if you like, by explaining it to us so that we know why you're answering the way that you are? Can you tell us why you're giving a particular answer to a particular question? And that's very much something that we'll want to see you do. Do you have those communication skills? And we will also look for evidence of your application to your studies. So we're looking for those people who actually secretly quite like learning and really think that studying in the library is actually not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And we will be looking for that in your application so far. And so somebody who's really dedicated to learning and that really comes through in their application, that's really what it is that we're looking for. I would say at least 50% of a person's likelihood of success on the course is determined by their attitude to it. It's not their innate ability. And certainly people who come in with just innate ability and don't have a motivation don't tend to come to a very good end. So you really do need to balance those two things. Yes, you need to be smart and you need to have that ability, but you also need to be really dedicated to what it is that you're doing and prepared to put the work in. Inevitably, out of all those subjects I showed you on that slide before, there will be some that you really love and some that you really find a bit of a struggle. And we need to know that even though it's the ones that you really don't love all that much, you will still persist with them. You'll find something you do actually quite like in them. You'll look for that thing that does make them work for you. You'll be able to work through the fact that you do initially find them more challenging, and you'll get to the point where actually they're really not so bad in the end. You need to know that you have the ability to do that. As I say, things like concentration, enthusiasm, and motivation to do really well, that is at least as important a component of our taking you as knowing, yes, they've got all of the analytical skills that we want them to have as well. How do we look for it? We look at your exam results to date, but we don't just look at the raw score. We have got really good in recent years at contextualising your scores. So we can see not only how well you did across compared to the rest of the country, we know how well you did in your particular school. We know whether you were the best candidate in your particular school in a particular subject. And that is really important, because if your school has been in special measures and you didn't have any teachers for half the subjects, it may be that the highest grade is not a 9 or an A star or whatever it is. It may be that the highest grade is lower than that, but we know you've got the highest grade that is available in your school. And that's really important, because we know that is then the same as the highest grade in another school, which might actually be a higher grade in itself. So we do look at the raw scores, and if you've got really good raw scores across the board, that's great, and we will look at those. But we will also look at what we call a contextualised score, which is how well you performed in your own personal school. And we are able to do that, and that means that we know you're the best in your school, even if overall your school's results are not amazing because of all sorts of structural reasons that are beyond your control. So it's really important to make that point, because it is both kinds of academic results that we are looking at, both kinds of exam results that we're interested in. We will also look at your reference, so what does your teacher say about you? And again, we know that some teachers are very used to writing up good references, we know that other teachers are not so used to it. But that's fine. What we want to know from them is just, again, how they position you relative to your school, whether they think you are motivated and enthusiastic, and those sorts of things. So we will look at their reference. We will also look at your personal statement. We get quite a lot of questions about this. Honestly, the personal statement plays a much lower role in Oxford than it does pretty much at any other university. And the reason for that is because if we select you for interview, we're going to have a 25-minute walkie-talkie personal statement with you in the form of an interview. So actually, the job that a personal statement usually does is to give a selector, somebody who's doing admissions at the university, a bit of a sense of who this person is when they're only a piece of paper. But we'll get a sense of who you are by talking to you and meeting you for 25 minutes at least. So actually, we don't put as much emphasis on the personal statement as other universities do. What that means for you is if you've been to one of these talks at Manchester or Warwick and they said, we really want to see this in personal statement, fine. Do whatever they say because it's playing a much bigger role for them than it is for us. So tailor your personal statement around the universities that are going to use it rather than around us because we won't rely on it all that much, to be honest. Things we're looking for in it, we are looking for motivation, enthusiasm, that kind of thing. Organisation is good, discipline is good. Things like, are you doing other things beyond your course? That's something that's really important. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but that's the sort of thing we're looking for. We will also look at your LNAT results. You won't at this point know what your LNAT results are, but we will at the point of admission. And so we will look at that. And that, again, is a means of testing somebody's innate ability independently of their school results. So again, if your school results are good for your school, but not that good overall, and you've got a really strong LNAT, that tells us that you're somebody who's really... we will use the LNAT and we will use those two kinds of exam results, real and contextualised, to select you for interview. And once you come for interview, obviously the interview then plays a really big role in our selection process as well. A surprisingly big role, actually. It really can in some instances. If you look at the data, tutors are clearly using it, to a very, very great degree. So it really does play a big role in the way that people actually go on to make decisions. In terms of personal statements, just say a little bit more about that. As I say, it's not that big a deal for us. So it's not something I would get massively hung up on as far as your application to us as distinct from other universities is concerned. It's just what you think, just say sensible things that you think we want to read, really. Tell us why you want to do your, and just tell us a bit about your thought process, really, is what we would say. If you are going to tell us stuff that you can do, it's quite good if you can explain how that's helpful to a law degree. Again, we're not going to just judge you on the personal statement, so if you don't do this, it's really not that big a deal. But if you want to mention things, that's quite a useful thing to do. The main thing to say to you is that there is no formula, right? So don't feel like there's a formula. And if somebody says to you, oh, I know that, if you want to apply to law or not, you have to follow this formula. Really, really don't believe them because I'm telling you for a fact there isn't one. It really is just you writing some sensible stuff. There really isn't anything more to it than that. So anybody who wants to sell you a kind of secret sauce or a secret recipe for your personal statement, run for the hills and don't go anywhere near them because that's complete and utter rubbish, to be honest. What we want to know is about you, which is the same as this interview. We just want to figure out who you are, what kind of a learner you are, what sort of stuff you do. What else do you do with your time? That is something that's quite useful on a personal statement. That's probably, there's only two things really as an admission tutor I look for, and that's one of them. And this does not have to be, in my spare time, I play grade 153 music and I'm an Olympic athlete and, I've solved 52 different diseases. It's really not that. It can literally be, I have significant caring responsibilities, I work in my family's business, I have a Saturday job where I really get on with the people I work with and I do quite a lot of work there. It can literally be anything. What we're looking for is two things. One, can you organise your time? Can you balance commitments against your schoolwork effectively? That's a really important thing when you come here. There will be all sorts of other things for you to spend your time doing, and knowing that you can figure out what you need to spend time doing working and what you need to spend your time doing playing football, whatever it is it's good to know that you've already got that nailed and that you can do that. So being an organised person is something that's nice to see. It's also nice to see that somebody is doing something else significant alongside their schoolwork. Because it would worry me if I saw a personal statement that said, well, I do my schoolwork, but it literally takes me every hour of the day to do it and I find it everyone's struggle. Because I'm going to think, well, that person hasn't got the capacity for expanding into a university course. There is a big jump between school and university. And if you're dealing with somebody who's going, well, I do my schoolwork and it's fine and I get really good grades, but I also work several hours a weekend and I work quite a lot of weekends a week, or I do this other stuff and I do this other stuff and I do these other things, I think you've got quite a lot of capacity. It's really not killing you to do your schoolwork, is it? You've got plenty of capacity for expansion. You're not stretched as far as you could be stretched. We can stretch you that bit further when you come here, and you're perfectly capable of making that big jump because you're kind of more than on top of what you're doing at the moment. that's what we're looking for. And as I say, you can demonstrate that by doing anything alongside your studies, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be particularly impressive in and of itself. It's just, yes, I can balance my studies, organise my life, commit to a bunch of things and keep my commitments because I've grown up and organised like that. And I can do more than just my schoolwork. And, you know, I can keep on top of my schoolwork and still do a bunch of other stuff because my schoolwork's not really, you know, the maximum I could cope with. Those are the two things really that we're looking for from a personal statement from that point of view. The other thing that's useful is if you, and this goes to your teacher's reference as well, if you can flag up any problems that you've had. So obviously, especially over the last couple of years, there may be things that have affected you particularly that made it difficult. You know, if you were very ill when you were trying to sit with GCSEs, for example, they're not a fair reflection of how actually good you are and how well you would have done on a good day. So let's hear about that. If there's anything like that that you think has particularly affected your performance above the normal, and we've all had our performance checks over the last couple of years, but if you think there's been something particularly affecting you, then please do make sure you and your teacher let us know that, because we will take this into account, but we can't do that if we don't know it. So do make sure that that goes down there as well. But really, those, I would say, the key things for personal statement. What else are you doing? Are you organised? Is there anything special that's affected your performance that you'd like to tell us about? Those are the key things I would take away from this, really. The other stuff is more about writing personal statements for other universities, to be honest. Admissions process. These are some really important dates to make note of. The UCAS form deadline is the 15th of October. Please write that down. Please make sure you get to your application by that time, because we can't take it if you don't. Our standard up there remains at the moment 3A table. We do review this from time to time, and then I put the equivalent for advanced hires and the IB. We do, as I say, review those grades as happen. So I can't guarantee they'll stay forever, but at the moment those are our admissions grades that we look for. Or the equivalent if you're coming from another system, then we have a big table that we can convert, you know, the equivalent in your system to the same sort of currency exchange into what it would be the equivalent in the other grades. So we will be able to assess your qualifications, whatever country you come from. Those are the most common ones we need. But as I say, we'll be able to assess your grades, whatever they are and wherever they come from. The LNAT I mentioned before, this has, as you probably know, 42 multiple choice questions based on 12 passages, and you take 95 minutes to answer that part of the test. You then have to write a short essay, 600, 700, not very long words at all, and you've only got 40 minutes to do that bit of the test. Best advice I can give you there, again, be very wary of people who think they can sell you the secret formulas to the LNAT. The best thing you can do, honestly, is go to lnat.ac.uk and look at their past papers that they have on the site. Do be familiar with the test site itself, be familiar with what an LNAT test feels like, what it's like to sit one, do some practicing so you're familiar with the logistics. That will also give you a sense of what sorts of questions you're going to ask. That's literally all the preparation that you can do for it. So again, be really, really wary of everything who say, oh, you know, I can tell you how to sit an LNAT and I'll coach you whatever. No, just go to their website. That's really all it is that you can do. There's no point doing anything else. Again, date's really important. We need your LNAT results by the date that we need them, to the 15th of October. What that means is that you need to register in time to have sat your LNAT by that date. So you really need to register a month sooner, by the 15th of September. Honestly, if you can register on the 1st of August, that is the best of all. So you can't register too soon for your LNAT, and if you're not careful, you will end up registering too late, and you'll either have to travel to the other end of the country to sit it in time, or you might not be able to sit it in time, and then you can't apply to it, so you can't consider it without it. So please make sure you are ahead of the game on sitting your LNAT, and then, you know, that means you will get the results and it will be good, and you've got it out of the way as well, and that's just a nice thing to be done. So yes, be as ahead of the game as you can on getting your LNAT booked and sat. We are involved in running the test and testing the questions, so they're not totally independent of us, although it is, you know, a national test and it is used by other universities as well. Your essay will be marked by us, so we will read through your essay. Your written tutors, particularly at interview, will read through your essay when they're considering your application together. All of it is designed to test for that stuff that I was saying before is really important. Can you read things closely? Can you take a passage and read it closely enough to be able to figure the answers out? can you reason effectively? And then for the essay, can you write effectively? You know, are your communication skills good? It doesn't really matter what you say, you just want to see that you've said some intelligent stuff in an intelligent way. So that's the sort of thing that we're looking for on the essay. We get 8 applications per place for law, so we are one of the most heavily oversubscribed subjects in the university. But the good news is that if you get invited for interview, your chances have gone up dramatically, because at that point it's 2.5 people per place. So your chances are much better at that point, because it's 2.5 to 1 when you come for interview. All the interviews take place in December. It's usually over the course of about a week. There's some interviews Monday, Tuesday of the week, and then some other interviews at the end of the week, Thursday, Friday. So you may find that you do 2 rounds of interviews, say a lot of people do. It doesn't mean anything either way. You know, some people don't get in straight off, some people do get in straight off, some people are seen by more than one college. It's just, as I said to you before, about our shuffling people around the colleges to make sure that we've done the right thing and we're getting the right people overall. As I said to you before, you'll almost certainly get 2 interviews at your first college, and then more than half of the people we interview will then be seen by a second college later on in the week, so there's a fairly high chance you will do that as well. You can see an Oxford Law interview, there are videos of Oxford Law interviews on the admissions page. The questions you get asked obviously won't be quite the same, but you'll see the kind of thing that we ask and the kind of way that it goes. We don't expect you to know any law at all. We know some people do law A-level and some people don't. That's fine. What we try to do with everybody is get you onto stuff you don't know, whether you've studied any law or not. We'll try and get you in unknown territory so that you can see how you read it from scratch about something. So there isn't any question in preparing for it, because we're really going to try and see what you do. You know, what can you do if you come to something absolutely cold and you've never seen it before? How can you deal with that? So it's very much about using your own common sense and your own reasoning, and everybody is equally capable of being able to do that. So we're going to look at that sort of stuff that we were talking about before. We're going to look for you being logical, for your reasoning, for you using your common sense, to be honest, and for your sort of sense of fairness. Would it be fair to treat these 2 situations the same? Well, if not, why not? Can you explain to us why you think there's a difference between them? There probably won't be a right answer to what you're being asked, or if there is, we'll help you to get to it. Most people come away from their opportunities, including people who get in, going, oh, that's just really, really difficult. I'm sure I got into it. It's terrible. It wasn't terrible. It's just that we wanted to stretch your brain, because we wanted to see your brain stretch as far as it possibly could. If you ask everybody what's 2 + 2 and they say 4, we can't tell the difference between you because you've all done equally well. If we stretch people further and further and further and further and further, it will eventually get to the point where we go, I don't know, my brain tells it. And that's fine, because that's what we want to see. We want to see, you know, how far your brain can go. And so it will feel very difficult and it will feel very challenging, but that's a good sign. That's about one. And it's just a sign of our being able to sort of see how you can reason. And really, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at your brain. You know, we aren't, at that point of the process, we're not that interested in anything else. We just want to know how good you are and how great your potential is for the subject, really. So can you be logical? Can you reason? Can you use common sense and fairness? Can you be careful and precise in your use of language? Can you prepare for it? Not really, because you can't really, and we will take you onto new stuff. If you are the sort of person who's used to reading the news and going, oh, actually, that doesn't make any sense, do I really think that? I don't agree with that politician. That's a good start. You know, you're already thinking critically about the sorts of stuff that you hear. You don't take things for granted. You don't let people tell you stuff. You analyse it for yourself and make your own mind up. That's good. That's the sort of thing that will help you. So anything that you can do, anything that you debate, any discussions that you have with your friends about whether, you know, something that's going on in the world is the right thing or not, that kind of stuff is useful. But to be honest, you can't really do very much to prepare specifically. It's just being that kind of general intelligent person in the world that will help you, really. So that's it. So really, so we're very glad that you came to visit, because the most important thing is for you to make your own mind up on the basis of the evidence that you can actually see and hear today. Don't let anybody tell you anything outside of that, you know, or check it out for yourself if they do. We are all available, so I'm going to ask questions in a minute, but I'm also available by email, and so email the admissions details on the faculty website with any questions that you might have as you go about your application process, or, you know, as you're thinking about making a decision about applying. Please do get in touch with us rather than let somebody else tell you, you know, let us tell you what the actual situation is. College open days, you're also going to see some colleges, and so you're going to sense there, and I'm sure the same thing will be true as well there. And as I say, there's lots of information on the university's website and on the faculty's website more generally and more broadly. So there's lots of other things to see there. So yes, make sure that you don't make a decision in the dark. If there's something bothering you, a question you want to ask, or something that's worrying you, if you're maybe for this reason, please do get in touch and talk to us, and it's really nice that you're here. So, okay, questions then. Is there any questions for the audience and ambassadors? Please let me know if there are questions coming through on Slido, and I will answer those as well. Yes.
Speaking of the technical stage and library, does Oxford give you free research games, JSTOR subscriptions?
Yeah, exactly. So most of those are available. You get a thing called a single sign-on, which is your university password and details which you use for everything. They use to log into anything you might need to log into during your time here, but they will also give you access to the library facilities, and that's sort of like walking into the virtual library, and then everything's on the shelves there for you. So once you're in via your SSO, you've got access to all the university databases. Yeah.
What sort of weighting your GCC results have in the application process?
So at the moment, in terms of the shortlisting process, we kind of do a third, but then we also look at the raw scores as well. So we look at the LNAT essay, LNAT multiple choice, and contextualised GCSEs, and then we look separately at the raw GCSEs as well. So they're kind of equally weighted at that initial application process in terms of who we shortlist on the basis of. And what we do a lot of is we spend a lot of time looking at our data and figuring out whether we're using the right data metrics to assess people to get the right decision. So we can constantly review the way that we use our data to do that. At the moment, we're using them pretty much equally. If we figure out one of them is a better predictor than the others, we might change that balance in future. But that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to figure out who's got the most potential, who is it most worth our seeing in this interview. And at the moment, that's the way that we do that. When you come to interview, actually, we do still use those in that kind of way, but not as extensively. We might use them a bit to decide who goes on to get a second interview or have another look at them then. But really, once you come for interview, it's very much more the tutor's own assessment of how they balance those things against your interview performance and how they take what they think are the most important things for them to take into account. So it's much more fluid once you've got to the interview stage. And so there's some use of metrics again to decide who gets a second interview, but that also is very much controlled by the college tutors. So it's much more fluid once you come for interview, but to get to interview, it's really a combination of those factors that we look at. Yes?
Yeah. If your GCSE grades are at the top when you look contextually, does that have a massive impact?
It doesn't have a massive impact. I mean, this is one of the advantages of having a series of different metrics, is that if you've got an amazingly strong LNAT and then your GCSEs aren't quite as good, then you've got the same chance as somebody who's balanced the other way. Maybe their GCSEs are amazing, but their LNAT is a bit weaker. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking across the metrics that we've got in front of us and across the whole cohort, and sort of a competition at that group for who's got the best balance of those things. And if people are a bit weaker on some areas, but they've really done something well on one, they've just got the best LNAT result ever, that's something that we'll take into account even if the other bits are a bit weaker. So, yes.
What are some example questions, just general questions at interviews?
At interview, so we might ask them sort of logical reasoning questions and scenarios, or do you think I ought to be able to do this? Do you think I ought to be able to sell my kidney or whatever it is? And it's just so there's a variety of things we're testing. Some of those, do you think I ought to? We're saying, can you figure out what that would make people do if we said that was a rule? What would be the advantages of a rule like that? Maybe we'll get more kidneys available. What would be the disadvantages? Maybe rich people would get kidneys. That's not so good. Can you think through what the pros and cons of a particular thing might be? Or other times we might give you a scenario. We might give you two sets of facts which look really similar, but actually there's a difference between them. And we say, should we say the rule applies to both those sets of facts? And you think, well, actually, no, because they are very slightly different. So I'm kind of thinking maybe they're not. And we'll pursue that thought process with you. Okay, that's probably right. Why do you think that? Why do you think they're slightly different? And you might give a reason. You might say, well, it's not quite that, is it? Push a bit further. It's not quite that distinction you give us. It's a slightly different one, isn't it? And we might give you some other examples to try and sort of bring that out with you. So we'll kind of work with you to solve a puzzle almost. And most people find, obviously it's nerve-wracking when you first come into the room, but most people find when they get into answering the interview questions, it is kind of puzzle solving, and you will find the interview solve it with you. They'll sort of say, it's not quite that, is it? Here, think about this. Here's a clue. you know, and can you pick up on that clue and do something with it? And so it's a sort of collaborative process through the reason process. And it's just to see your brain working, you know, it's just to see what your brain does when we do that with you. So, so right behind you, there's somebody else.
What's the impact of A-level combinations?
Impact of A-level combinations doesn't really matter at all. So you can do any combination of A-levels that you want to actually, and people do. So we get people who come doing all sciences and all maths, or we get people who are doing all, you know, history and English and French, and that's absolutely fine. You find that if you don't, you know, if you almost certainly find there's something that you need a bit more of. So if you're somebody who's been used to writing lots of history type essays, we'll need to take you off being quite so descriptive and get you to be a little bit more normative and analytical and critical. If you're somebody who's been doing maths and science, you're probably really good at that, but you're probably going to find it a struggle to write coherently for a little bit because you've not done that as much for 2 years. So those people will find there's something they need to build up on again. I personally did English, French and chemistry, which is quite a random combination, but just shows you, you know, you can do any combination that you like, because we're not, as long as they're academic, you know, as long as they're not entirely practical A-levels, then yeah, that's absolutely fine. We're happy with anything. Yes.
If you're doing the course of year abroad, how advanced does your level of that language need to be?
So the question about year abroad, people online, the language requirements for year abroad, typically people are doing A-level in the language that they apply for. Obviously that's not relevant if it's your, you know, native tongue, if you speak both languages at home. That's obviously something that's different, but that's sort of the level of language that we're looking for. And as I say, you will be given a language test as part of the application process if you're here and you're doing that. Yeah, very far under there.
How much is it valuable?
Oh, sorry. So again,
How much is it valuable?
So EPQs, the question about EPQ value in the admissions process, the answer is they're not valued, and they have no formal impact on it. They're not one of the metrics we look at, typically because they're not something every single person does. And so we tend to stick with metrics that we can have one of for everybody, because that makes it a more level playing field. It may be something that comes up in interview, and particularly if you have chosen to do a law-related EPQ, you may well find that's something that your interviewers are just genuinely interested in, and they want to talk to you about, because they think, well, that sounds like an interesting topic, I'll talk to them about it. So you might find that it is something you end up talking about in interview, but it doesn't have a kind of formal impact on in terms of the metrics that we look at for shortlisting or for selection. Sorry, right, very end over there, yes.
What way can you do AS?
So again, question about how AS levels count. They don't formally. Because we don't have them necessarily for everybody. So we're really looking at predicted A levels is what we look at that point. Again, it might be something that they talk to you about. If they are low in some respect, that might be something that your interviewers raise with you because it doesn't seem consistent with the rest of your, performance or something like that. But by and large, again, we don't have them for everybody, so we can't look at them. Yes.
What sort of LMAT score would students have a good chance of getting?
So I was looking at, I think last year I think I was saying that 28 was the average. It's very difficult to give you a threshold. We don't have any thresholds for what our minimum LMAT score is, and that's because it's a competition every year. So if every year people do blindingly above 28, and that's actually way below average for that particular year, then 28 is not a helpful number to have just told you. So it really depends on how everybody performs in a particular cohort in a particular year. And we get given graphs which show us that, so they show us the kind of curve of LMAT performance. And we also have that contextualised as well to some degree, so we have it based on what we call bands, socio-economic banding, and we have the LMAT by band as well, so we can sort of tell what your LMAT is relative, again, to your socio-economic cohorts. Yes?
If you mention a specific area of law that you're interested in, personal statement, is it likely that your interview question will be related to that, or would it just be a generic question?
So if you mention in your personal statement a particular area of law, it's not necessarily going to come up. It might do, and you must be aware, obviously, that you're sort of exposing yourself to that risk. So don't write something in your personal statement that you wouldn't want to be able to talk about to, but also don't bank on them talking about it. It may be that some tutors will pick up on it and others won't. Different tutors have different ways of doing things. Some of them will spend more time with the personal statement, other tutors at Pembroke, we typically don't spend all that much time on it. We tend to ask people more general questions about their schooling and their subjects and what they like doing and what they don't like doing and that kind of thing. So it tends to be more general in our case. So yeah, be prepared to talk about it if necessary, but be aware that you might not end up doing. Yes, next.
Can you do a conversion course?
You can. So I actually have another slide about this, which I didn't consult because it's quite complicated. But that they show you the routes to being a lawyer if you decide you do want to do law. I said you don't have to do law to be a lawyer, just as you don't have to be a lawyer if you do law. And what that shows you is the different routes through to qualifying as a lawyer. If you want to be a solicitor, it's technically not necessary to do a law conversion or a law degree now. It is technically possible to go straight through from a non-law degree through to doing what they call SQE, Solicitors Qualifying Exams 1 and 2. They did a survey as this new system came out, and 77% of law firms said they couldn't imagine taking somebody who hadn't done at least a qualifying law, at least a law conversion course. That's certainly been our experience as a faculty in terms of talking to law firms that yes, they were not anticipating taking people who didn't have either a law degree or a conversion course equivalent. So yes, probably you do have to, but technically you don't have to be a solicitor anymore, and you don't have to do, and you end up doing want to be a barrister. So yes, that's the kind of sort of diagram of the pathways. Yes.
What measures has Oxford taken to deal with recent rate inflation, and will this, for example, make our GCSE results less?
Well, so this is why our contextualisation is really good, because it's school specific. So if the school's inflated, we're still testing you relative to your school. And so that it's been particularly useful actually over the last couple of years of grade inflation, because it's meant that we could be that specific we could balance out, if you like, the grade inflation, because it doesn't matter if one school's inflating more than another school. If the question in each case is yes, but how has this student performed against their own person's school, you could put that sort of range of performance on at any point in the absolute range, and it doesn't really matter. So from that point of view, our contextualisation is really helpful with that actually. Yes.
If one has disruptions or contextual issues with the PCSEs, to what extent will these be taken into consideration for admissions?
So the question is, if you have context-specific things which have held you back doing your GCSEs, they will be taken into account, is the answer. Make sure that we know about them. That's why the person statement is a good place to put them, and your teacher's reference is also really helpful if they can set out how they think that's had an impact. Obviously, we have to be aware that pretty much everybody has had some degree of impact over the last couple of years. There hasn't really been anybody who's escaped, but we know that that's affected different people to different extents, and there may be something very specific to you that's had an impact over and above the impact that everybody's had. So yes, if you can make us aware of those things, that's very much something that could be taken into account. So we talk about the metrics that we use, and we do, but it's very much a two-stage process. It's a kind of technical counting process, but that then your application is seen by an individual. And the question that we really ask individuals is, why should we not apply the standard metrics to this person? That's effectively what we send people off to look at the applications to tell us. Is there a reason why we shouldn't just take this application at face value? That's probably the principal question that the shortlisting panel asks itself with every application. And so it's exactly the kind of thing that would be flagged up at that point. And again, if you've also done well on the LMAT, then we've got quite an interesting picture of somebody who's maybe not done as well as the last access to GCSE, but there's a really good explanation for that. And goodness, we look at their LMAT, which is pretty good. So we can then see the whole picture and think, yeah, this is definitely somebody for whom we should discount the GCSEs a bit and put more weight on the LMAT probably. And so it would help us to do that. Ambassadors, are there any side questions that haven't been answered that we might want to cover?
There's one focus on is work experience essential for a personal statement, and I would argue that it can be useful in terms of saying why you want to study law, but the main thing is to remember that you're saying why you want to study law, whereas work experience is kind of focused on being a lawyer and things like that. So unless it's something like, oh, I did work experience and I did on this topic, and afterwards I did so to affect this with podcast or anything. Unless it's something like that, it can be a little bit difficult to it's not essential to fit in. It would be better to focus on something academic that makes you found interesting, especially when you actually want to study law. So I wouldn't get too caught up with the idea that you might have work experience or anything like that.
Thank you, that's really helpful. So the online people question is, do you need work experience to put in your personal statement? And I absolutely echo that. No is the answer. You really don't need work experience to put in your personal statement. No, for a number of reasons. So one, the very good point you make that we're talking about taking people to study law, not to be lawyers necessarily, and those are not necessarily, as I've said, the same thing. So that's one good reason. Another good reason is not everybody has equal access to opportunities for work experience. That might depend on where you live and where your family lives and so on. And so that might be might be much more easy to achieve that if you live in London, and much more difficult to achieve that if you live somewhere else. So we wouldn't necessarily look for that at all. The other thing to say is that we do look for some enthusiasm for law, and it worries us sometimes if we think maybe somebody's been told to do law by their parents or their teachers. So, if it's obvious from your application and from you when we talk to your interview that no, this is not somebody else's idea and they're making you do it, this is really something you genuinely want to do, it is a demanding course and you will need to be very committed to do it in order to do it. So, we want to see that that's the case. But really anything can show us that that's the case. It could be that you read a book, it could be that you went and just spent some morning sitting in your local Crown Court, it could be, doing things like it could be anything really, as long as we can see some genuine enthusiasm for the subject. You don't have to kind of demonstrate that in any particularly fancy way at all. That's the only thing we would even remotely look for, and say that's only to check that it was really your idea and you're not really sort of made to do it by somebody else. Yes.
During the law degree, is there any sort of practical experience or application years?
Yeah, really good question. Do we give you practical experience during your law degree? We do a thing called mooting, which is not really practical experience in the sense that it's fictitious, but what that is as if you were arguing an appeal case in front of either the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court. We give you the facts. We do here are the facts, and your client needs to argue this, and it will be something which is not really quite decided in law yet. So there will be some arguments to be made on the side of your client, there will be some arguments to be made on the side of the opposition, and you will have to make those arguments, and the opposition will make those arguments, and it will be done as if it was a court hearing for the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court. They are very often used by tutors. I use them a bit in my first year criminal course just to give people a sense of how legal reasoning works. We do a moot about whether HIV transmission should be criminalised or not. So we do that just in place of a tutorial 1 week. We do that just because it's an interesting way of going through that process. You will also do it in your first year as part of your legal research skills and mooting programme course, which you do alongside your academic subjects. We have to be able to say to things like the Bar Society and the Law Society that you can use legal databases and you've got some experience in legal research, and so you do a moot as part of that to demonstrate that you can do some legal research on an interesting question. There's also lots and lots of opportunities if you find that you enjoy mooting and you're thinking maybe you want to be a litigation barrister when you're done, then there's lots of opportunities to do competitive mooting across the university. One of my current second years is doing a thing called the Jessup Moot, which is a major international competition. If they get through to the final, it's in Washington, DC, against teams from universities all over the world on points of international law. So there's as much opportunity for mooting as you might want. If you really like it and take to it, you can do lots. Everybody does a bit. So if you don't like it, you don't have to do it again. If you do really like it, there's lots of opportunities. So that's quite good practical experience in the sense that it shows you what it would be like to have to argue one of those cases. There's also a university pro bono society who do some work with practitioners, I think, as well. So you might get some opportunities that way. The other thing that you'll find is that if you are thinking of going into practice when you're done, you will do back schemes with solicitors firms, or you will do mini pupilages with barristers' chambers. And in those, you'll have to apply for those separately from the course, but they'll be very keen to take you. And your tutors will write your references for them and so on. And you will find that on those schemes, you get to work with them and some of the work that they're doing, and that will give them a sense of whether they would like to hire you, and you a sense of whether that's really something that you would like to do when you're done after all. So those are very useful, and most people do those in the vacation after their second year. They do quite much of those.